very shortly. I've been looking forward to today's show since we started corresponding with my friend Jim Hingley, and we get to spend about 45 minutes to an hour with a man and a stakeholder that we have tremendous respect for. The last time he was on the show, I thought it was just fantastic discourse, and we were chatting about the governor and mandates in schools and autonomy at the school board level, and how the governor was handcuffing that autonomy and decision making at the school board level. Today, we are going to champion an individual in Mr. Gregory Swanson that is just an unbelievable legacy he has. He was the first black student at the UVA Law School. And it's a very timely event because on May 19th, which goodness is in 9 days, there's a historical marker ceremony where I have a feeling Mr. Jim Hingley is going to be at this event. I'm going to ask him when the cameras go on. I know this topic means quite a bit to him. We've also heard Mayor Lloyd Snook, who I believe is going to be watching today's program, talk Gregory Swanson as well. So viewers and listeners, we're live on all social platforms. Sit back, as our friend Alex Erpy says, grab your café con leche and listen to what is going to be an entertaining and enlightening history lesson for Mr. Jim Hingley, our friend and the Commonwealth's attorney here in the great county of Albemarle in Central Virginia. Judah Wickower is our director. We can get rocking and rolling here in about 8 seconds. I'm good on my end. Let's welcome our friends from Richmond to the program, our friends in Short Pump. Scott Aaronworth, our favorite Virginia Beach Esquire, if you're watching, let us know. And oh, you are watching. Hello, Scott. Love when you watch the program, Mr. Aaronworth. We've dubbed you the king of Virginia Beach, just an all-around great guy. Folks in Lynchburg on the show. I love the relations we're making in Danville, since we've had Lee Vogler, the councilman, on the program to talk about Danville's Dora. We got to get Lee back on the show to update us on the Caesars and on the Dora and the comeback city.
He had like 5 charts that he brought last time, and he didn't get to show them off.
Lee?
Yeah.
Really?
So got him loaded up, ready to go.
We got to get him back on there. That's the voice of the distinguished Judah Wickower, who made quite a positive impact on yesterday's program that you're hearing. If we have a mic and a 3-shot ready to go, if something tickles your fancy, Judah, I would love to get you on air. I thought you made a tremendously positive impact on yesterday's program. We can rock and roll. J-Dubs, when you're ready. Guys, good Tuesday afternoon. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille show. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in Charlottesville, Albemarle County, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world. Today, we are presented by Castle Hill Cider and their 231 Festival, which is just around the corner. Sunday, May 15th. Goodness gracious, middle of May already in 2022. Sunday, May 15th. It's an event that champions Route 231 and all the amazing merchants along that corridor. You can enjoy wine and beer and cider and delicious food trucks, activities for kids, live music, local artisans, a festival of dynamic proportions. You can buy those tickets at castlehillcider.com/231. An anonymous donor dropped the ticket prices for the 231 Festival because the benefit of the festival is the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank. They are the beneficiary. So we thank the anonymous donor to contributing to the festival and dropping tickets to, I believe, $50 now castlehillcider.com/231. Folks, today's show is going to be awesome. The gentleman that is in our studio, who you will see in about 15 seconds, we are lucky to have him in Central Virginia and in Albemarle County. You may know him as the Commonwealth's attorney. I know him as just a fantastic resource of a lot of information: history, current events, politics, the courtroom, the law. Likes a cold beer from the Wool Factory from time to time. Just a great guy. Judah Wickower, if we could, on a two-shot, let's welcome our friend Jim Hingley to the program. I am super pumped for today's show. I know you're such a busy man. Your schedule is always full, so I'm very grateful for you making time for us and our viewers and listeners.
Well, thank you, and I always appreciate being here, and I appreciate talking to the wide audience that you have. So today we're going to talk about Gregory Swanson, and in the intro you already highlighted a ceremony that's coming up, but I want to emphasize it and give a little bit more detail before I go into the history lesson that we may have here today.
Sure.
And so on May 19th at 2 o'clock, please mark your calendars, there's going to be a historical marker installed in front of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library Central Library, and that's the one right here at 201 East Market Street. I guess it's a block and a half from where we're sitting now in this studio. Downtown Charlottesville, the Central Library. So historical marker, you've seen historical markers that are erected along the roadways and in front of buildings and so on. This is a historical marker commemorating the Gregory Swanson case. So why is the historical marker going up at that location? That location, the library, for those of you who've been in Charlottesville for a while, may remember, was formerly the United States Post Office, the Charlottesville Post Office. And as was typical of federal buildings in the era when that was built, which was in the 30s, the federal building had the post office on the main level, and upstairs it had the federal courtroom. So the federal courtroom is where this case unfolded, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. But the federal courtroom was upstairs in the federal building, and the post office was downstairs. And of course, the associated facilities with the courtroom, the federal court, such as the judges' chambers and jury rooms and all of that, that's what was upstairs at the library. And interestingly, when the federal building was converted to a library, they preserved the courtroom. Now, it's not set up as a courtroom anymore, but it is the original courtroom where this case, the Gregory Swanson case, was heard. So and it's now called the Swanson Case Courtroom. So we're going to have the installation of the historical marker outside, and then after the ceremony, and there'll be speakers at the ceremony, including members of council and the Board of Supervisors and some others. After the ceremony is over and the historical marker is installed, everyone is invited to go upstairs to the Swanson Case Courtroom for a reception. The public is invited. Please come. This is an amazing event commemorating an amazing event in history that occurred at that spot.
I love it. May 19th, 2 p.m. We will highlight this as we get closer and closer. I mean, can you guys believe we're already in May in 2022? So this is just a fantastic story and piece of history that should be championed for generations to come. And Mr. Hingley knows this better than most. Gregory Swanson, the first black student at the UVA Law School. Let's start anywhere you want to begin.
All right, well, let's start with how was it that Gregory Swanson applied to the law school? And this is, there's so many facets to this story. It is a little bit hard to organize, but I'll do my best. So the first question is, well, what brought Gregory Swanson to apply to the law school here at the University of Virginia? And the answer is, his application, his interest in going to the law school here was part of a civil rights campaign that had been mounted for many, many years by the NAACP. The NAACP was using constitutional law to further the cause of civil rights, to break down the color barriers that existed in the United States during that era, the Jim Crow era. So it was a conscious decision that was part of an overall strategy to challenge white institutions and break down the color barrier. And the NAACP was very deeply involved. And the general of the strategy was Charles Hamilton Houston. And he should be a familiar name. I think he's probably not to a lot of people. But in terms of civil rights history, Charles Hamilton Houston was the dean of the Howard University Law School. And so he was at the law school developing the strategy. He was an eminent lawyer and academic. But he was not only developing the strategy, he was training the law students who were going to go on to become lawyers and civil rights heroes. So this all emanated as part of this NAACP Charles Hamilton Houston strategy. So Mr. Swanson was already a lawyer. And you think, well, why would somebody apply to law school if they're already a lawyer? And of course, the answer to that is that law school also offers graduate degrees. So he was a lawyer. He was from Danville here in Virginia, and he applied as part of this strategy to see what would happen at UVA. Now, let me set the time. I don't think I mentioned. This was in 1950. So think back to 1950 and where we were in terms of civil rights. This was before Brown versus Board of Education, which was in 1954. So this was leading up to, eventually, the Brown versus Board of Education case that ended segregation of public schools. So Mr. Swanson applied to the law school, and in 1950, his application went to the law school faculty. And the law school faculty agreed to admit Gregory Swanson, which I think is really a very important aspect of this story, is people think of this in terms of he was an African-American student, he applied to UVA, he was rejected. Yes, he was rejected by the Board of Visitors, which maintained Jim Crow segregation, but he was accepted by the law school. And so the law school faculty was on the right side of history when it comes to civil rights, and something I think is important for us to remember. One of the leading advocates on the law school faculty for Gregory Swanson's admission was Mortimer Kaplan. And his name is pretty well known around certainly the university, but in this community. He's been a benefactor to the University of Virginia, and there's a lot of places there and programs up at UVA that have his name on it. But anyhow, Mortimer Kaplan was, interestingly, I think, the first Jewish law professor at the University of Virginia Law School. So he was breaking a barrier himself by being on the faculty. He was a leading advocate for Gregory Swanson's admission. The admission was denied, as I said, by the Board of Visitors, and so the case went to court. Gregory Swanson, with the assistance of the NAACP legal team, took this case to court. The hearing was held, as I described earlier, at the Swanson case, what's now called the Swanson case courtroom, the federal courtroom right here in downtown Charlottesville on the second floor of the federal building. And in that hearing, the court decided that Gregory Swanson should be admitted to the University of Virginia and entered an order requiring UVA to admit him as a student. Now, Jerry said at the beginning that he was the first African-American student at UVA, which is absolutely correct. But there's a distinction beyond that, and that is that he's the first African-American to attend any school in the South, any segregated school in the entire Old South, the Confederate States. So it was enormously important decision. It was groundbreaking, and it was part of a train of decisions that were leading up to Brown versus Board of Education. So it's just it's a very important moment in civil rights history, and it's something that happened here in Charlottesville, and it's something that we should all commemorate and celebrate, because it was a great breakthrough.
The historical Markle ceremony, guys, is May 19th at 2 p.m. right down the road here on Market Street. The public is invited. Jim has graciously encouraged everyone to come to this ceremony. Can we speak to the dynamic of faculty admitting Mr. Swanson and then the Board of Visitors essentially trying to kibosh it? I mean, the faculty see or saw a student that was beyond qualified to attend the school. How much, maybe risk is not the right word, perhaps more courage, was involved with the faculty making this yes, this admissions yes to Mr. Swanson?
Well, again, let's look back at the time. The time was 1950 in the South, in Virginia. And so, yes, there were not a lot of people who were going out on a limb to do the right thing when it came to African Americans' attendance at universities, African Americans riding buses, African Americans voting. I mean, the list goes on and on. We know what Jim Crow was like, especially in the South. So I think, yes, I think that the law school faculty, particularly to act unanimously, was taking a stand, taking a principled stand, and I respect that. And I think that I like to think, I don't know what was said in their deliberations, but I like to think that being law school faculty, they understand, or understood then and understand now, how the Constitution works and why it was the right thing to do under the Constitution to admit Gregory Swanson.
Do we, the Board of Visitors, when they tried to, when they did intervene here, was the intervening done solely, this is a white university at the time, we're not going to admit African Americans? I mean, it was as clear cut as that?
It was as clear cut as that, and there was some desire on the Board of Visitors' part to uphold the barrier to Mr. Swanson's admission for political reasons.
What's that mean?
This was a political issue, and the Board of Visitors is political. The law school faculty is not, in the same sense, political. They were making a decision on principle. They were looking at the Constitution. They were looking at their own moral compasses. But the Board of Visitors had to uphold, at least they believed that they had to uphold, the law of Virginia. And the law of Virginia said no admission for African Americans.
John Blair watching the program. We love you, John Blair. We like when you tune in. Got a couple counselors on the show now.
Yeah.
Why is the Swanson story or legacy not more a part of everyday local history or even vernacular? You know, I've heard you have in a lot of ways led this charge. We've had this conversation with Mayor Snook, also an attorney,
Yes.
who understands the significance of Mr. Swanson. Why do you think this is not more everyday knowledge than it you know, doesn't it feel like it should be?
Well, absolutely it should be. It's important in civil rights history on its own, on the face of it, but it's important because it happened here in Charlottesville. It's part of our nation's civil rights history, but it's also part of Charlottesville's local history. So we bring those two things together. I don't have a good answer for why we don't. So many of us are unaware of this, or this hasn't become prominent in local history. I know that I've worked for many years to bring this story to Charlottesville, and we've had several commemorations over time to bring the community's attention to this really important event. And I've partnered with Evans Hopkins, and I want to mention his name. Evans Hopkins is Gregory Swanson's nephew, and I became a friend of his, and he lives in Richmond. I became a friend of his through another connection, but as friends, we would talk, and he told me the story of Gregory Swanson, and then asked me to help him because he wanted to encourage Charlottesville to be more aware of this history. And so I've partnered with him in a lot of the programs that we've done. And he's an amazing resource as a person who is in Gregory Swanson's family and really knows intimately how all this affected the family and affected the community.
How did it affect the family?
Well, they've been they've been supportive of what Gregory Swanson did. I mean, when somebody does something like that, I mean, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of family support. And the
Collateral damage probably felt by the family as well.
Yes. And so he had the family support, and the family has during his lifetime, the family cheered him on, and after his death and some of the recent events that we've had, the family is still coming, and it's, I think his sister is still living. There are other family members, and I believe some of the family members are going to be there on May 19th. So the family is a witness to history through that personal connection of their own family member.
Here's one of my favorite aspects of this. Included, and I learned this from Jim, and Judah's got some artwork that he can put on screen, some photography. Included on Gregory Swanson's NAACP legal team arguing the case in Charlottesville were Spotswood Robertson, Oliver Hill, and Thurgood Marshall. I mean, let's put that in perspective. What a legal team right here.
Well, yes. I mean, and this is another aspect of the story, and I'm glad that you brought it up. I think those lawyers are just incredible civil rights heroes. And also, as I mentioned earlier, those are all lawyers who came up through the Howard Law School and through Charles Hamilton Houston's mentorship of them and involvement of them in the civil rights struggle. But not only were they the lawyers who won this important case, but they were here in Charlottesville. They were here in that courtroom that we're going to have the reception next week for the installation of the historical marker. And there's a picture, I don't know if it's up or not, but when it comes up, you will be able to see them. And the picture was taken.
And that's up. Judah's got it up for us.
Oh, it's up?
Yeah, he's got it up for us here.
Okay.
Yeah.
This picture was taken, again, remember the time, September 5th, 1950.
So viewers, I should say, look at the screen here as Jim gives us a play-by-play on this photo here.
Yes, and this photo is taken, and I know exactly where it's taken. If you look at it carefully, you can see a chimney in the upper right-hand corner of the photo. And that chimney, the building that has that chimney on it, is still there, so you can get the perspective of where this was taken. This was taken, as you also can see in the photograph, on the low wall on the edge of what was called then Robert E. Lee Park.
Wow.
Yes. And so the people in the picture include In the center, let's see, 1, 2, 3 over from the left, that's Gregory Swanson. Next to Gregory Swanson, going again toward the left, is Oliver Hill. Next to Oliver Hill is Thurgood Marshall. I think people can recognize him. On Gregory Swanson's, going to the right from Gregory Swanson, the individual there is Spotswood Robinson. Then there's Martin Martin, and at the far edge of the picture is Dr. Jesse Tinsley, who's not part of the legal team, but he was part of the NAACP team that was supporting Gregory Swanson. So there you have a picture. I think it's an extraordinary picture. It's an incredible picture. All these civil rights heroes were right here in Charlottesville arguing this case in the federal court.
In Robert E. Lee Park.
Well, the picture is taken on the low wall on 2nd Street, because the courtroom is also on 2nd Street, on the 2nd floor of what's now the library. And so I like to think about it this way, and this is just personal, who knows, but I like to think about all these civil rights heroes standing there in literally the shadow of the Robert E. Lee statue.
Right.
And thinking to themselves what a victory that they had achieved over white supremacy.
Exactly. And the significance of the photo even more so today with what we know from August 12th. You know, one of the, certainly one of the worst days in the history of our community here. Now the park is revitalized, the statue's gone, and we're looking for a new identity for this park. I mean, I think you talk about one of the most significant photos, historically significant photos for Charlottesville. That's one. How'd you get that picture?
I got this from the Oliver Hill family.
Okay. He's got the hard copy. That's the actual photo.
Well, it's a photograph, but it's a copy. But it's
That's
not,
amazing.
Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. So let's put this in perspective here. He's got a phenomenal legal team. It's arguing the case in Charlottesville. We've identified Spotswood Robinson, Oliver Hill, Thurgood Marshall. Walk us through the dynamics of the case. Time, was there coverage at the time, media of this? I mean, because we're talking about this case significantly changes university landscape in the South forever.
That's a good question, and as much as I've learned about the Gregory Swanson case and the history, I haven't really dug into the archives to see what coverage there might have been. That'd be something I should do.
I wonder, I mean...
Thanks for the suggestion.
I would hope that, you know, in 1950 was, 72 years ago, that it would have gotten, you know, significant coverage. Now, when he's eventually a student, I guess he would be a graduate student in the law school.
That's correct, yes.
As a graduate student in the law school, do we know anything of how his fellow students treated Mr. Swanson? Was
Yes,
he well
we do.
received?
He wasn't.
He was not.
Yeah, sadly, but perhaps predictably. And he, there are some statements, some portions of memoir from him that talk about his experience at UVA, and he wasn't really accepted, although there were some. It wasn't all one way or the other, but he recalled having a difficult time with the students who, again, 1950, you can just imagine that this wasn't a situation where he was warmly received. And he lived in Vinegar Hill. He didn't live at the university. He lived on Vinegar Hill, which is another, I think, interesting
Great part of
historical connection, because Vinegar Hill is an important part of our history, and Gregory Swanson was a resident there. And I think living in Vinegar Hill, he drew on the support of the African American community living there to help carry him through the rough times that he certainly experienced as a student in an otherwise all-white university.
Danny O'Day is watching the program. He works for Politico, and he says, Jim, your work is a source of endless pride for locals who believe in the power of using the law for true justice. It's a pleasure to hear you speak, Jim. It's Danny O'Day.
Well, thank you.
Watching the program. Comments are welcome. If you have questions about Gregory Swanson, please put them in the feed, and I will relay them live on air. Neil Williamson, friend of the program, welcome to the show, and thank you for watching and listening. How about the staff and the faculty? They voiced in unison that Mr. Swanson should be admitted into the law school. Do we know if that unified voice translated into equal treatment with Mr. Swanson and his peers at the law school?
Well, again, we have to make some assumptions. And my assumption is, given that the law school faculty's position in all of this, that the law school faculty would certainly give equal treatment to Mr. Swanson. And I don't think anything that he said that I'm aware of indicated he had difficulty with faculty and staff. I think it was the relations with the students themselves where there was some difficulty.
The first black student to attend the UVA Law School.
Yes.
A significant turn of events and circumstance. How do you see this May 19th historical marker ceremony playing out? What would you like to see besides a well-populated event? What else can we expect from it?
Well, of course, the event is being planned by the library, and the library worked to obtain the historical marker, and there's a process that you have to go through in terms of development of historical resources and so on. And so I haven't taken part in any of the planning for this, but I'm aware of it, and I'm happy for it. And I guess what I would say is what I would like to see is, I'm sure, what the library has already arranged. Speakers who are going to highlight the story of Gregory Swanson and put it in the context of civil rights history. I mean, it's an incredible individual story, I think, but it's also an incredible part of our civil rights history. So I think what the event is intended to do is to celebrate the courage of Gregory Swanson, celebrate the ability of our court system to rectify mistakes. Again, as one of the commenters said, it's an incredible thing when our judicial system can remedy the wrongs that are happening in our communities. And then, just focusing on how this fits into the civil rights history of our country and particularly of our community.
Sarah Smith, watching the program, she's watching in Richmond. She has this to say: Jerry, I enjoyed the program. I especially love when you have guests like Mr. Hingley on the show. Please ask him if he has any idea of how Gregory Swanson walked or was transported or got to the law school from living from Vinegar Hill. That seems like a little bit of a hike for classes to and from the university each day.
He walked, I know that.
He walked.
Yes.
Down West Main Street.
He talks about walking. And of course, remember, the law school was located on the central grounds back then.
Okay, so that's different then. I did not know that.
Yes.
Okay, so law school was closer than it would be then now.
Yes.
Okay, so that is a closer hike. So Sarah, great question right there. You just got us into a conversation where I just learned something. So it was central grounds, whereabouts? It was
called Clark Hall, and actually when I went to law school my first year, I attended
at Clark Hall.
At Clark Hall.
Okay, so that's like half the distance probably, well, I mean, just back of the napkin here, than what it would be now. Because now it would be a hike.
Yes, that's true, but it was located at Clark Hall, and And so he did walk. I don't know if he walked every day, but I know from reading things that he did walk.
So
and
can
he
you-
thought a lot about what was going on while he was walking. It's a time of contemplation.
Well, and just considering the walk, I mean, if we can, and granted, we have to assume a little bit here, but walking from Vinegar Hill down West Main to grounds, that means he's leaving what would be almost a safety net in Vinegar Hill and undoubtedly going through white portions of Charlottesville
Yes.
down West Main Street. So even the walk alone would be arduous, full of stress, most likely, racism and hate. At least one would assume. And 1950 in Charlottesville in the South.
Well, I understand why you would say that, and to some extent I agree. However, it comes down to a question of whether he was recognized for who he was, that is to say, a student at an all-white university, because African Americans were the backbone of UVA. Let's not forget that. They were working in the kitchens, they were working in the hospital, they were working in grounds. So there would have been plenty of African Americans going down the way to UVA and on the UVA campus. But the hostility that you're assuming that he might have experienced, and I'm sure that he did experience some, would have depended on his being recognized as a student at an all-white university, not as a worker.
Right. That's how, and thank you for getting that photo on screen. We have the portrait shot of Mr. Swanson on screen now.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you did, because I want to sort of extend this as far as UVA is concerned. So once this story became better known, and it was not known at UVA when Evans Hopkins and I started working on bringing this information to the community. UVA responded very, very positively, and now the UVA has an award, a student award, that they give every year. It's named for Gregory Swanson, and they have Gregory Swanson materials in the law library, and they have this portrait. If the portrait is up by, you can see the portrait, which UVA commissioned and now is hanging in a prominent location in the UVA Law School, and there's a plaque that goes along with it. So they have embraced the Gregory Swanson
As they
legacy.
should.
As they should, absolutely.
You're going to appreciate this one. This is from Bob Yarborough. Bob, it was great seeing you yesterday. He says, outstanding work. Thank you, Mr. Hingley, and thank you, Jerry, for sharing this. I had only run across the story of Mr. Swanson in a brief message in the Crucible of Race. This story should be more widely known, circulated, and embraced as a significant part of our collective narrative. It's from Bob Yarborough for you, Jim. We love when you guys comment on the show here. So let's throw this to you here. And Judith, multiple folks are now asking to see those photos back on screen. So if we could do the first one, is it Emancipation Park? Is that what it's called now? I
think it's called Market Street Park.
Market Street Park.
It was called Emancipation Park for a while and then changed to Market Street Park.
Okay, so the photo of Market Street Park, and then the two portrait photos, if we could. So this question's coming in. What does Mr. Hingley think is the best place to learn more about Gregory Swanson and his legacy?
I would say the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. And they are kind of the custodian of materials relating to the Gregory Swanson legacy, and can help with reference. Of course, everybody can, the internet is another source, but I'm thinking about the library and, of course, UVA Law School Library, which is probably a little less accessible to people, but is certainly open to the public. So those would be the places I would suggest people look.
Will the community get to hear you speak at the event?
I'm not planning to speak, it's fine.
We certainly all hope that you would. We enjoy hearing you speak. It's May 19th
Yeah.
at 2 o'clock at the library. More comments coming in. And guys, we don't have to, we can open up the comments to, or the questions to all topic matter. It does not have to be Gregory Swanson alone. But if you'd like to ask questions about Gregory Swanson, we will certainly entertain them. This one came in prior to the show. It speaks to Jim Hingley's star power, if you may. It's rare that comments come in for guests before the show starts. We had a handful come in. This one was on criminal justice reform, which was the foundation of your campaign.
Yeah.
And the viewer would like to know how criminal justice reform, how you think the job you've done so far with criminal justice reform locally.
Well, I appreciate the question, and if I might, could I just wind up with a thing or two more about Gregory
Sure,
Swanson?
absolutely.
And you're going to enjoy this one. Remember I talked about Mortimer Kaplan, and Mortimer Kaplan was the leading advocate on the law school faculty for Gregory Swanson's admission. Mortimer Kaplan later on went to be appointed the the commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service of the United States. And he was appointed by John Kennedy, and he took office in 1961 or 1962, right after Kennedy had come into office. And Mortimer Kaplan hired Gregory Swanson as an employee, as a lawyer in the Internal Revenue Service. And I just think that's an amazing connection from 1950 to the early 60s when Mortimer Kaplan was in Washington, and he hired Gregory Swanson to work with him in the Internal Revenue Service. And Gregory Swanson worked there for the rest of his life. He worked in government.
Full circle.
Yes, isn't that amazing?
That is absolutely amazing.
And here's one more.
Please,
for you.
please.
Mortimer Kaplan's son is Michael Kaplan. And Michael Kaplan is a friend of Charlottesville that you know.
Michael Kaplan. Friends of Seville.
It's Friends of Seville.
He's the head of the nonprofit.
Yes.
No way. That is such, that's the thing I love about this town is everybody's like 1 degree apart from each other. So Michael Kaplan, I'll give a little background on this. 1 second. Excuse me. Michael Kaplan is leading the charge. I guess Friends of Seville will call it a nonprofit. I'm very intrigued if it's heading in the direction of a business improvement district. Many folks that are very in the know have said they do not expect it to go in the way of a bid. But essentially, Friends of Seville is a nonprofit that is doing its best to improve downtown Charlottesville. So far, they're most known for the wrap of the Dewberry structure. I'll call it a structure. Too much respect for Mr. Hingley to go down my normal take of the Dewberry. I'm not going to do that today. And at Friends of Seville, I was actually in downtown Charlottesville a couple weekends ago, Jim, with my wife and our son, and we saw a jazz band on the downtown mall. It was a 4-piece jazz band.
Yeah.
And they were just playing a free concert, like right in front of, I think it was Crush Pad Wines and Christian's Pizza in front of Bizou.
Yeah.
And there was a banner, jazz band courtesy of Friends of Seville, enjoy the music. And I was walking on the mall with our son and my wife, and I'm like, this is why I live in this community. Here we have a nonprofit that has pooled resources and has hired this band for the benefit of quality of life of us in downtown Charlottesville. And it just made me proud to say I love Seville and to be from Charlottesville and to live in Albemarle. How about a segue for you? Because I know you have your pulse, your finger on the pulse. How do you think the community's doing? How do you think Charlottesville's doing? Albemarle County's doing? You know, one thing I've noticed this year, some of that turmoil with local government in the city, it's now quiet. It's in the background.
Yeah.
The front page is not about the soap opera, and it's now more government being government, which from my standpoint should be efficient in the background and almost in some ways forgotten. I'm seeing that now. It seems like things are great. What do you think?
Well, I think things have been moving in the right direction. I'm an Albemarle County resident, and I work in Charlottesville, so I'm tied to both communities.
Same.
Yes, and I am very interested in what goes on here, and we've been through some tough times, and I think that both communities are doing well or doing better, moving in the right direction. Let's put it that way. And so I'm hopeful for the future. There's a lot of issues that we have to work on, a lot of financial issues that particularly affecting the city in terms of school reconfiguration and affordable housing and so on. And there's been some tension and difficulty between the legislature and Charlottesville in terms of revenues and raising revenues and giving the locality the power to control its own financial destiny. And that's another whole conversation I don't want to get into, but the Dillon Rule and some of the difficulties that come from that. But let me segue to criminal justice reform with
Please.
one more Swanson story.
Please.
And that is, in addition to being a member of the Vinegar Hill community, the Charlottesville community as a student, Gregory Swanson contributed to the well-being of this community by taking on a tough case, a criminal case. And again, people need to remember this is 1950, and I'm going to read one line from the summary of this case, and it will tell you what I'm trying to get at here. And this is one line, the beginning line of the summary of this case. Defendant, and by the way, his name was Albert Jackson. Defendant, a colored man, was indicted for the rape of a white woman, tried by a jury, found guilty, and his punishment was fixed at death. 1950. And so Gregory Swanson represented this man, and you can imagine that at the time this was a case, and you can picture from this summary what the community sentiment would be, and the difficulty that I'm sure this man had in getting legal representation. Gregory Swanson represented him, as this summary shows, unsuccessfully, but Gregory Swanson continued with the case, and what I was reading from was a Virginia Supreme Court opinion that affirmed the conviction and the death sentence, and the man was executed. And Gregory Swanson argued that the confession was coerced and there were errors. I don't know anything more about the case than what I'm reading. I don't know what actually happened. We'll never know. But Gregory Swanson was there as a champion for this African-American man who was subject to this accusation and conviction and ultimately sentenced to death. And I know, because I've represented people charged with offenses that could result in a death sentence. I know the burden that a lawyer has in taking those cases, and Gregory Swanson took that burden on, and he took it on at a time when representing an African American for a charge brought by a white woman. The burdens that he had were far, far more than any burdens that I experienced representing African American men in death sentence cases. But I just think it's another dimension to Gregory Swanson's character and to the contributions that he made to this community.
Can you give us a glimpse personally of that vulnerability, of the burden of representing someone whose life is on the line, tied to what you are doing?
Yes, I can. I don't know if I can do it justice, but it's just an incredible responsibility. Somebody's life is in your hands. And in the cases that I represented, defendants, they were all African American, and they were all African American men. And we know that the death penalty was applied in a discriminatory manner for African Americans. So in addition to all of the burdens that you carry in representing an individual who is subject to a death sentence, you have the additional concern that the odds are stacked against you because your client is African American, and that your client has a greater risk of being convicted and sentenced to death. So yes, it's an enormous pressure, and I'm grateful to say that of the 4 African Americans that I represented in death sentence cases, all of them received sentences other than death sentences.
It speaks to you.
Yeah, well, but those cases are just they're the most difficult thing that you can do as a lawyer, I would suggest.
Kevin Higgins in Greenwood, watching the program. He says, Jim, in your vast career, is there a case that you are most proud of or an outcome? And if so, could you offer some perspective?
Well, the case that I'm most proud of is the one of the 4 death sentence cases, the one that was the most likely to result in a death sentence, that we got a life sentence in. It's hard to briefly summarize all that was involved, but I, investigation. I had to go to Harlem to investigate the background of family members, and had to bring in witnesses from all over the country. Had to challenge the prosecutor, who I think was guilty of some misconduct, and I had the opportunity to call the prosecutor in the case to the stand and cross-examine him about misconduct. I mean, everything is on the line, and you fight as hard as you can. And in this case, with the help of many, many other people, we were able to get a life sentence for an individual, and I'm really proud of that. I believe that the death penalty is wrong for many, many reasons. But now let me switch to criminal justice reform. And when I ran my campaign, because of the experience that I had, because I knew how many people had been exonerated after being convicted and sentenced to death, tells you that the system doesn't work, and how the system was discriminatorily applied to African Americans. I knew that I wasn't going to seek a death sentence, and I ran on that, and I said I will never bring a charge against a person that could result in a death sentence, or I would never seek a death sentence. And I stood by that pledge. I never had a case come up where that was a matter that was involved, but for criminal justice reform, Virginia, the state legislature, also abolished the death sentence. So there's criminal justice reform both locally. When I ran, there would be no death sentences in Albemarle County. And after I was in office, the legislature said there will be no more death sentences in Virginia. So we have the reform at the local level and reform at the state level.
Multiple questions coming in. I got one for you personally. We've talked about Gregory Swanson's legacy, and his legacy will really ring loudly on May 19th, a block and a half away, and it continues to ring loudly here in Charlottesville. thanks to people like you. Have you considered your personal legacy and what it will be in courtrooms and in a community like Albemarle, in Charlottesville, in communities like the University of Virginia? Because I think it's one of significance and honor and doing things the right way. I mean, I remember when you, in 19, I believe it was 2019, that's when you ran.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
We were sitting at this table and we were talking about your campaign. And Jim, everything that you said in that show, your platform, if you're fortunate to get elected, you are doing. You have followed through with your word now that you're in office. Have you considered your personal legacy?
Well, thanks for saying that. Well, you know, when I ran for Commonwealth's Attorney, I was a career public defender. And I sort of thought that I'd learned a lot about what was wrong with the criminal justice system, and maybe if the voters would send me into office as Commonwealth's Attorney, I could start fixing things. And so...
then COVID happened.
And then COVID happened.
Yeah.
But you know, in terms of my own personal legacy, I think really I was given an opportunity to take a career that was as a public defender, and a good career, and a career that I enjoyed very much, and move in a different direction to serve the community in a different way. And as you just said, I think part of my legacy is I ran a campaign that was geared to informing the voters about what I thought needed to be done. And giving the voters, I mean, this is an elected office, and I really strongly believe that the voters, the citizens of this community, should have a say in how prosecution occurs in this community. So and what their values are, what they saw, how they saw the criminal justice system moving forward. And so I said very clearly, very frequently, this is what I'm going to do. And I've been doing it. I mean, the job's not done yet, but everything I said I was going to do, I've started doing, and we've had a lot of success. And I think maybe one reason for that is that I'm not a politician. This was the first office I ran for, and I thought to myself when I was deciding whether to run or not, the kind of politician I want to be is one that tells the truth all the time to everybody, not talking out of both sides of my mouth to get votes. And I held to that, and I also firmly believed if what I was saying to the voters they didn't like and didn't vote for me, I was fine with that, because all I wanted was for them to have the choice themselves, to be informed about, number one, what I thought was wrong, and number two, what I thought the solutions were. Well, they believed in me, and they voted me into office, and so now I have a personal commitment to following up on my word, but I also feel that I have a commitment to all the people that put me in office to do the right thing.
Kelsey Burke has a question for you. Kelsey, whereabouts, you comment often, whereabouts are you watching? If you could let me know, that'd be great, please. Kelsey says, how beneficial is it to have a like-minded attorney like Joe Plantania representing Charlottesville to help with your pursuit of criminal justice reform?
It's terrific to have Joe. And Joe and I are partners and allies. And, you know, we help each other in terms of thinking things through and looking at the evidence of what works and pursuing strategies that are bringing real benefits to the community. So yes, Joe's a terrific partner.
Kevin from Greenwood has this comment. This is a great one. I've been watching your show for years. Mr. Hingley's responses to your questions may be the most genuine answers in the I Love CVille show's history. Like Jim, don't like Jim, he always speaks the genuine truth. And that's from Kevin in Greenwood. Scott the attorney in Virginia Beach for you. Jim, do you miss being a defense attorney?
There are times when I miss it, but I'm too engaged in the mission that I have now to spend a lot of time missing that.
Reminiscing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm really committed to this mission.
Mr. Yancey, who we've dubbed the King of Waynesboro, watches the program all the time. Have you ever had a client found guilty and later exonerated?
I haven't, no.
This question is a good one as well. I'm wondering this. Multiple people are asking this on the feed. We asked Mayor Snook last week if he was going to run for re-election. Mayor Snook said yes, he was going to run for re-election right here in this chair. Are we going to be fortunate to have you run for re-election? That would be what, next year, right?
Yes, 2019.
2023.
Yeah, I mean, 2019 was when I first elected.
Right.
It was like 2023 is the next election, sorry.
So you're going to run?
I am absolutely going to run.
Fantastic. That is great news.
And I've already, I haven't made a formal announcement because it's not time for a formal announcement. This is until 2023. But I've told the Albemarle County Democratic Committee and others, people who need to know, because if I'm not running, then
They got to find somebody.
changes things.
Right.
So it's not at all a secret, and hasn't been, but just so people understand this, I'm not making a formal announcement, but I am running, yes.
Well, that's to our the community's benefit here. Items you're most proud of from the first term?
Well, being an advocate for ending the death penalty in Virginia. And when I say being an advocate, that was what I was going to do in my own office, but I was an advocate at the legislature, and I testified in front of legislative committees, and I was able to testify as a prosecutor. And oftentimes on criminal justice reform issues, prosecutors have one viewpoint and defense lawyers have a different viewpoint. But I was fortunate to be able to use my standing as a prosecutor to support the abolition of the death penalty in Virginia. So that's really a major accomplishment, and I'm very, very proud that Virginia stands now as the only state in the Old South that has abolished the death penalty. So it kind of ties back into Gregory Swanson. When he first attended UVA, he was the first African American to attend any school in the Old South. So death penalty. What else? There's just so many things. I'm very happy to, again, thinking of the partnership with Joe Platania, to have worked together with him to drive down the population at the jail to levels that have not been seen for decades. And this is a result of criminal justice reform practices that he and I have in our offices. We believe that jail should not be a first response, it should be a last resort, and there are many alternatives to jail. So he and I have worked together, and partly because reducing population at the jail helps make the community safer, because it makes it less likely that COVID will spread in the jail, and then once it spreads in the jail, will come back into the community. So partly it was because of that, but mostly it was because we believe that we're using the jail too much, and we think as prosecutors that there are other ways of addressing criminal behavior. So the jail population has been significantly reduced, and people who are not in jail are being given opportunities in other ways to be held accountable and to get some help so their life can get back on the right track. So that's a big thing. And it also ties into the current plans that are being made for renovation of the jail. And Joe and I have been very strong advocates, and I believe the community's with us on this, of fixing the jail but not increasing capacity. And typically when a jail goes through a process of planning for the future and committing significant funds for construction at the jail, they will build in an increase in capacity because that's always the way it goes. But what we've done is so far we've been able to convince the policymakers that they should put the money into more program space, better facilities that treat people humanely, rather than putting the money into creating more bed space that we hope that we won't use in the future, that we are committed to reducing now and into the future the population of the jail.
I'm curious, the public schools receive funding based on enrollment. Do jails receive funding based on, and enrollment's probably not the right word, incarceration rate? Is that the right term?
Yes, they do get money. Now, we have a jail, regional jail, so the money is apportioned by bed, they call them bed days. Every day is a bed day. And so they allocate Albemarle bed days, Charlottesville bed days, Nelson bed days. So, the funding that Albemarle, Charlottesville, and Nelson County give to the jail is based on their respective proportions of bed days. Then the jail gets other funding, I think some state funding, and I'm not sure what the formula is for that. But essentially, the formula is going to take into account the bed days, which is, I think, your question, right?
That is my question.
Yes.
That's my question. A couple more for you here. I love when he comes on the program. And an hour and 7 minutes feels like 17 minutes when Jim Hinchley is here. We talked last time, and this is one of the ones that came in before the show.
Yep. Last
time you were on the show, we were talking Governor Glenn Youngkin, and we had a friendly, almost a friendly debate on the show. And we were talking Youngkin and whether or not he overstepped his bounds with these mandates with reopening schools during the pandemic. And he did this like, it's not even the top of the first inning. I mean, he was still in the dugout. He was like on the on-deck circle when he was doing this, literally brand new into office. What do you think of, this question came in before the show. We're now in May, so he's been in office, 4 months and some change?
Yeah.
What, the job that he's been doing so far, pros and cons? Because I know you're hesitant to offer some, yes, from time to time, constructive criticism here. Pros and cons.
I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of pros at the top of my mind.
Okay, that's fair.
And I think he's, I mean, we just went through the veto session. He vetoed a lot of bills, some of which were passed by either unanimous margins or near unanimous margins, meaning not just bipartisan, but almost unanimous, in some cases unanimous. And so you question, why is it that a governor would veto a bill that the Republicans in the legislature supported? And I think he's doing it for political reasons. And I guess that's his prerogative. He's a politician, but I think it's playing with the process. I mean, if he has a genuine disagreement with a bill, go to the mat on it, veto it, articulate your reasons, argue about it. But what he was doing was just sort of playing a game, knowing that the Republicans who supported the bill would also support his veto. So it comes down, I mean, I guess the problem that I have with this, it's not about policy, it's about winning. And I think that's a lot that's wrong with our current political system, if you want to talk about it in the state or in the country, is it's more about winning an issue or a point than it is about making good law, making good policy. So I I would say I would have to overall fault him, because I think that's what he does even in other actions as a governor beyond the veto. But that's something that just occurred recently, and so I mentioned that. He's, take the budget, for example. What could be more important than getting a budget and getting it on time? And it's not on time, and I know it's been delayed in the past when Democrats have been controlled, so I don't fault him for that. But I fault him for the way that he's been engaged as a governor with the budget process. I mean, again, he sort of draws lines and he says, I want to win on this. And that's not how we get a budget in Virginia, particularly in times of divided government. We get a budget by compromise and negotiation. And he called the legislature back to session for budget talks without even considering the fact that time hadn't come to do that, because the budget negotiators hadn't made enough progress to justify calling the legislature back into session. So he calls them back into session. I don't know if it's because he's a political novice or because he likes to mess with the system. But
Toy with people?
Yeah, but he calls them back, and it costs the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then they go home because it wasn't the right time. Now, what governor would do that? I mean, I don't know the reasons he's doing it, but the least negative reason he could be doing that is he just doesn't get it. But it could be worse than that.
I think it likely is, because you've got to imagine there's infrastructure and human capital around him advising him, hey, this is not the right protocol here. I mean, right?
I don't know, but anyhow, enough with Governor Youngkin.
Sure. Okay. One more question for you. And Judah, we have our traditional 145 phone call coming up. So we got about 60 seconds here. And normally for this 145 call, I'm calling our client at 144 and 52 seconds. So at about a minute and change here, what do you think of what's your take on the newly created 55th district? I'll set the stage real quick and then get out of your way.
Sure.
It is way more cohesive for Albemarle County. Before, Albemarle County was splintered and split. So we had a handful, was it 3 delegates or 4?
4. We had 4 delegates in Albemarle County.
4 delegates for Albemarle County. Absurd.
Yes.
Albemarle's cohesive voice was not well heard with 4 delegates. Now we have the 55th district. Supervisor Price is running. Rob Bell, a veteran, running. What's your take on the 55th?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that Albemarle was sliced up into pieces, and that was wrong. And so we had redistricting. It wasn't able to be done by the commission, but it was done by the court. And as far as I know, and I'm not an expert on redistricting, it seems to me like they really worked hard to do the right thing, to include all of Albemarle County except a little part that's adjacent to Charlottesville that belongs to Sally Hudson, to put all of Albemarle County together in a little piece of Nelson and a little piece of Fluvanna County. It just makes good sense. I think it's good law. I think it's good policy. And I appreciate that the Supreme Court tried hard to do the right thing. And I think in this case, I don't know about across the state, but in this case, it seems to me they did the right thing. And it sets up certainly a very interesting contest coming up in 2023, unless the federal court says we're going to do it in 2022. So,
Yeah, when will we know?
it's in the court now. Who knows? The courts set their own schedule, but stay tuned. We're either going to do this new 55th district in 2023, or we're going to do it now.
Wow.
We'll see.
Jim Hingley, boys and girls, he is amazing. Commonwealth's Attorney of Albemarle County, and just a talk show host's dream interview. Because you sit back and I get entertained and enlightened when you're on the show. I love when you come on the show. I'm grateful. I know you're busy. Thank you kindly for joining us.
Well, I appreciate it. And one last reminder, May 19th at 2 p.m., Central Library, be there.
Be there and come say hi to Jim. And let's honor Gregory Swanson, guys, and just an amazing career and legacy. Judah Wickower is our director. We call him our North Star behind the camera. My name is Jerry Miller, and this is the Tuesday edition of the I Love CVille show. And I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a good afternoon. Take care. It's going to tell us when we're off air.